A peaceful beginning in the town of Dover. Dover was the kind of small town you'd see on the cover of a postcard. Idyllic, tucked neatly between lush green hills, and populated by just the right amount of friendly faces to make every passerby wave hello. It was the kind of place people left big cities for when they wanted slower mornings, quieter nights, and that undeniable charm of community potlucks and weekend farmers markets. It wasn't perfect, but it was home. And for Lily Anderson, that's all that mattered. The Anderson family lived in an old craftsman-style house on Maple Drive, just a few blocks from Dover's only school, and a short walk to the local library where Lily loved to spend her afternoons. The house had a wide porch with a creaky swing and a yard always brimming with wildflowers, which Lily's mom, Sarah, cared for like treasured jewels. Inside, the walls were filled with family photographs, most of them snagged on sunny days when Lily's dad Michael couldn't keep his old film camera off his family. Lily, at 18 years old, resembled her mother, with soft blonde hair and blue eyes that always seemed full of wonder. She had an innocence about her that made her unforgettable to anyone she met. Though Lily had a cognitive condition that left her with the mind of a child, she carried herself with a lightness and enthusiasm that had a way of softening even the hardest hearts. The town cherished Lily in its own way, sometimes overprotective, sometimes too quick to lend a watchful eye, but always with kindness. Her days were simple, but joyful. She would often spend mornings by her bedroom window sketching pictures of the hills beyond the town, or making bracelets out of colorful beads she bought from Mrs. Cartwright's craft shop. If not at home, you could find Lily walking to Old Man Johnson's bakery down Main Street where he always saved her a blueberry muffin, her favorite since she was a little girl. "Got your special order, Lily girl," he'd call out, sliding her a muffin across the counter with a wink, as if all the other customers didn't already know it was coming. But Lily's world wasn't entirely without excitement. Enter Alina Brooks, bold, fiery, and seemingly everything Lily wasn't. Alina, just a year older, had this magnetic personality that drew people in but always seemed to make room for Lily in her orbit. Where Lily was cautious, Alina was daring. Where Lily hesitated, Alina leapt in head first. They were an unlikely duo, but the best friendships often are. Alina had taken Lily under her wing at school years ago, and since then they'd become nearly inseparable. Every Friday after school they'd meet at Willow Creek Park, where Alina taught Lily how to skip stones. Not that Lily was any good at it, but she'd laugh every time her rock made an unexpected plop into the water. "You've gotta aim, Lil," Alina would tease, tossing her own rock that skipped 5, 6, sometimes 7 times before disappearing. Lily would just shrug and smile. For her, it wasn't about skipping rocks. It was about being there with Alina, feeling like she belonged to something bigger than herself. The Andersons adored Alina for how she seemed to bring Lily out of her shell. "She's good for Lily," Sarah often told Michael after Alina dropped her off at home. Still, they couldn't completely shake the worry. Alina was a good kid, but her rebellious streak was undeniable. There had been whispers that she'd skipped school or hung out with older kids who didn't exactly have clean hands. Michael had confronted Sarah about it more than once, but Sarah always waved it off. "Lily needs a friend," she'd reply. "Better a wild friend than none at all." And so life went on peacefully, or so it seemed. Dover hosted its annual summer fair on the town green that year, as it always did, with folding tables of handmade crafts and sweet-smelling pies lining the walkways. Michael took his camera along, capturing Lily's glowing smile as she rode the carousel, her cornflower blue dress fanning out with every turn. "Best day ever, Daddy," she declared when they finally left at sunset, her hands sticky with cotton candy. Nobody knew then that this moment, this picture in Michael's camera, would later become a memory so bittersweet it would be unbearable to look at. The fateful encounter. The day Lily met Alina Brooks was a turning point in her life, the kind of moment that would be etched into memory like a golden thread woven into an otherwise ordinary tapestry. Lily was 15 at the time, sitting alone at the edge of the playground during lunch break, doodling a picture of the hills behind the school. Her blonde hair framed her face in soft waves, but her hunched shoulders betrayed a sense of vulnerability. Alina, on the other hand, was like a gust of wind on a still day. She swirled through the crowd with ease, her auburn hair pulled back into a messy ponytail and her worn leather jacket slung over one shoulder, as if she'd walked straight out of a movie about rebellious teens. Alina wasn't popular in the traditional sense, she wasn't a cheerleader or prom queen, but she had a magnetic pull. Everyone either wanted to be her or be near her, though Alina always managed to stay just out of reach. "What you drawing?" Alina's voice broke through the quiet as she dropped her backpack onto the patchy grass next to Lily. Lily glanced up, startled. Oh, nothing, just the hills. She closed her sketchbook instinctively, as if her simple lines and pencil shading were secrets not shared lightly. Alina raised an eyebrow, planting herself cross-legged on the ground with all the casual confidence in the world. The hills? You mean those hills? She jabbed her thumb over her shoulder toward the green slopes that cradled Dover on all sides. Wow, I mean they're cute or whatever, but don't you think the trees look kind of funny, like broccoli or something? It wasn't the kind of remark Lily had expected. Most people would have politely nodded or ignored her altogether, but Alina leaned closer, her hazel eyes squinting at the closed sketchbook, as though she could see through the cover. You like to draw a lot? Alina asked after a beat of silence. Lily hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, it makes me happy. Well, I'm Alina, and just so you know, you're way more interesting than everyone else around here. She stretched out her hand, waiting until Lily shyly took it. There was a warmth in Alina's grip, a promise of loyalty wrapped in her confident smile. From that day on, everything shifted. Alina started showing up everywhere in Lily's life, sometimes uninvited, but never unwelcome. She'd drag Lily to sit with her during lunch, pointing out who was secretly dating who or how Mrs. Glenn used the same one-liner every math exam. Alina had a sharp wit, and Lily couldn't help but laugh at her commentary, even as she quietly admired the other girl's ability to command attention without even trying. Wherever Alina went, Lily seemed to follow. For Lily, who had spent so much of her life feeling like she didn't quite fit in, Alina's friendship felt like a gift she didn't deserve but desperately needed. And for Alina, there was something about Lily's openness, her genuine kindness, that softened the edges of Alina's tougher exterior. One Friday afternoon, as they sat in the bleachers of the football field watching the local team practice, Alina nudged Lily with her elbow. You know you're my best friend, right? Lily's face lit up. Really? Me? Yeah, dummy. You're not like anyone else in this boring town. It's refreshing. Plus, you make really good bracelets. Alina tugged at the woven pink and blue bracelet Lily had made her a few weeks earlier. She wore it every day, the frayed edges proof of its constant company. Over time, Alina's rebellious streak started to rub off on Lily in small ways. Lily, who had always been hesitant and cautious, found herself doing things she never thought she would, like sneaking into the movie theater without a ticket or jumping into the deep end of the community pool when Alina egged her on. These little adventures felt exhilarating, like Lily was finally stretching beyond the invisible boundaries of her comfort zone. Still, there were undertones to Alina's life that Lily didn't fully understand. Alina rarely mentioned her home life, but the dark circles under her eyes and her offhand comments about her dad's temper suggested it wasn't as carefree as she made it out to be. Once, during a sleepover at the Andersons' house, Lily had caught Alina staring at their happy family photos with a strange expression, a mix of wistfulness and envy. You're lucky, you know, Alina had said softly as they lay on Lily's twin bed staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. Why? Lily asked. You have all this, a house that smells like cookies, parents who actually care. You're like the kind of kid people write songs about. Lily didn't know what to say. Alina never let her guard down for long, and before Lily could reply, Alina was already laughing, changing the subject to what snacks they should raid from the kitchen. Despite their differences, or maybe because of them, their friendship deepened over the years. Alina became Lily's compass in a world that often felt confusing and overwhelming. When Lily was teased for her slower way of thinking, Alina was there, turning her sharp tongue against anyone who dared mock her friend. You mess with Lily, you mess with me, she'd declare, leaving her point clear and undisputed. For Alina, Lily was a reminder of goodness, of someone unjaded by the complexities of life, and for Lily, Alina was a spark of fire, pulling her out of her shell and adding color to an otherwise predictable life in Dover. But what neither of them could have known, in those seemingly ordinary yet defining moments, was how tightly their lives would become intertwined, and how this fateful friendship would lead to something far darker than anyone in Dover could have ever imagined. The disappearance. It began like any other Tuesday morning in Dover, sunny and warm, with not-so-subtle hints of summer pulling the town to life. The air outside the Andersons' home buzzed faintly with the sound of cars heading down Maple Drive, kids biking alongside barking dogs, and neighbors exchanging greetings across impeccably trimmed lawns. Inside the house, though, something much more innocent was happening. Lily, did you pack your sketchbook? Sarah Anderson called out from the kitchen as she tied her apron behind her back, The aroma of fresh cinnamon rolls filled the air, a morning ritual for the Anderson family. "Yeah, Mom! Got it!" Lily's cheerful voice came from upstairs, where she was throwing on sneakers and tying her hoodie strings in front of the mirror. Her sketchbook lay half-tucked into her colorful backpack, peeking out alongside her bead bracelet kit. Today wasn't just any day, it was a day for adventures with Alina. Michael Anderson leaned against the kitchen counter, sipping his coffee, his Nikon camera within reach on the kitchen table. He gave Sarah a look. "They're always going somewhere, those two. Sometimes I wonder if we should be worried." "They're teenagers, Mike," Sarah replied with a shrug, sliding a plate of eggs onto the table. "Let them have their fun while they can." She paused only briefly. "But, remind Lily to check in, you know how worried you get." "Lily!" Michael shouted from the bottom of the stairs. "Just check in with us every couple hours, okay? And don't forget, be careful crossing Main Street." "Dad, I'm not a kid." Lily grinned as she bounded down the stairs, her backpack swinging behind her. She hugged her parents briefly, cinnamon rolls still warm in her hands, then swung the screen door open. "Bye, Mom. Bye, Dad." Minutes later, Lily met Alina at their usual spot near Willow Creek Park. Alina was leaning against a lamppost wearing an oversized jacket and an air of casual defiance that made her seem older than she actually was. "Ready to go, Lil?" she asked, tossing a balled-up gum wrapper at Lily's backpack. Lily nodded eagerly. "Where are we going?" "It's a surprise," Alina smirked. Her hazel eyes twinkled in that mischievous way that made Lily feel both excited and slightly worried. But Lily never came home that evening. By 7 p.m., the Anderson household was quieter than usual. Sarah, standing at the sink, occasionally glanced out the window at the fading light of day. By the time the sun dipped below the hills, her glances had turned into outright pacing, a damp dishcloth still in her hand. "She's late," Sarah muttered more to herself than to Michael, who was seated on the couch flipping through channels distractedly. "She's never this late." Michael looked up. "Did she text?" Sarah shook her head and picked up the landline to call Lily's cell phone. The faint buzzing sound was met with her daughter's voicemail. "Hey, this is Lily, I'm probably drawing something, leave a message." Sarah exhaled slowly, masking her concern beneath a furrowed brow. "She always picks up, always." "Maybe she and Alina just lost track of time," Michael offered, though he reached for his phone to text Alina just the same. "Hey kiddo, where are you and Lily? Let us know, just checking." By 9 p.m. calls and texts to both girls' phones had gone unanswered. The Andersons exchanged glances, the kind that conveyed unspoken worry. "You think we should wait a little longer before, I don't know, calling someone?" Michael asked, clearly uneasy. Sarah, now wringing her hands, shook her head. "No, this isn't like her. Lily's not careless, she doesn't just not call. Something's wrong." Michael leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table, and dialed the Dover Police Department. The conversation was short and unsatisfying. "Sir," the officer on the line said, "your daughter's 18. She's legally an adult, so even if she's technically missing, there's a 24-hour waiting period before we can take any action." 24 hours? Michael repeated, his voice rising. "She has the mind of a child, she's not some wandering teenager, she checks in, she always checks in." "I understand, but..." The officer paused, then added flatly, "There's nothing we can do right now." By 10:30 p.m., Michael grabbed his jacket and keys, muttering, "I'm not waiting around for someone to tell me my daughter's missing." Sarah, wiping tears from red-streaked cheeks, nodded fiercely. Together, as many parents would, they resolved to find their daughter on their own. At first, the search was simple. Michael drove around town, retracing Lily's usual routes: Willow Creek Park, Cartwright's Craft Shop, Main Street. Sarah stayed home by the phone, constantly redialing and refreshing Lily's location tracker on her phone. By midnight, unease had painted every corner of their lives with dark brush strokes. Michael wandered into Old Man Johnson's bakery, scanning the nearly empty street as the shop owner stacked chairs onto tables. "Hey Mike," Johnson greeted, his voice scratchy with age. He froze when he saw the downright tortured look on Michael's face. "Everything okay? Have you seen Lily today? My daughter, blonde hair, about this tall," Michael gestured. "She'd usually order a muffin or something." Johnson's face softened, but he shook his head. "I'm sorry, Mike. Haven't seen her today. Want me to keep an eye out?" "Please," Michael choked out, gripping the countertop like it might give him some sort of anchor. At some point during the night, Sarah called Alina's mother. "Is Alina home?" Sarah's voice trembled over the phone. "Yes, but she's already asleep. Why?" came the reply. Sarah hesitated, her shock paralyzing her. "Wait, Alina's home? Where's Lily then?" Sarah's pulse quickened. Alina hadn't thought to call or explain. Nothing about the situation made sense anymore. The sun rose to the sound of exhaustion. Neighbors and volunteers joined the Andersons in a growing search effort. Posters with Lily's smiling photo were printed and taped to every pole and store window. The question fell on every street corner. "Have you seen this girl?" Sarah and Michael began to convince themselves of something awful, that whatever had taken their daughter from them, it wasn't just a case of being lost. By now, whispers spread across Dover, the kind of murmurs that burn quietly but ferociously. Something bad has happened. The initial investigation roadblock. The next morning, the Andersons sat at Dover Police Department, the weight of their sleepless night clinging to them like a damp fog. Michael's eyes were red from staring into the dark roads, his coffee untouched and cold in a styrofoam cup. Sarah sat beside him, clutching her phone in both hands as though Lily's voice might burst from it at any moment, telling them it was all a silly misunderstanding, but the silence was deafening. Detective Ronald Crane, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a face creased by decades of small-town problems, was seated across from them. He had his notepad open, a pen poised in the air, but his expression was neutral, too neutral for a frantic mother and father. "So your daughter's 18, right?" Detective Crane asked, rolling the pen between his fingers. "Yes, but," Michael began, his voice sharp before Sarah placed a calming hand on his arm. "She is," Sarah answered, trying to convey urgency through pleasantries. "But Lily isn't like most 18-year-olds, she's special. She sees things differently. She doesn't reason or act the same, and she always checks in with us. Always." "We understand she has unique cognitive needs," Crane replied, his tone disarmingly even. "But legally speaking, she's still an adult. And adults do have the right to choose when and where they go." Michael leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "Detective, my daughter didn't choose to disappear. She didn't just decide not to come home. Something happened to her, and every minute that goes by—" "Mr. Anderson," Crane interrupted gently but firmly, "I understand you're worried. I would be too, but without evidence of foul play, a struggle, signs of abduction, we have to follow procedure. And that means waiting 24 hours before escalating missing person protocols." "Procedure?" Michael repeated, his voice rising. "You really want me to sit here and wait while my daughter might be in a ditch somewhere or God knows where?" Sarah wiped tears from her cheeks, her frustration bubbling into raw pleading. "She's vulnerable. We're not just talking about a regular teenage girl who stays out late. If she's lost, or worse, she wouldn't know what to do. We're begging you to help us." Detective Crane set down his pen and clasped his hands together on the table. The weight of his years in law enforcement was etched into his expression as he exhaled slowly. "Here's what I can do. I'll put out a preliminary alert for officers on patrol to keep an eye out. If Lily or her friends show up anywhere, they'll let us know. But an official search or investigation? That has to wait." Michael slammed his hand against the table, the sound echoing in the small room. "That's not good enough." "Mike," Sarah whispered, squeezing his arm again, but her voice was thick with shared heartbreak. Crane straightened, his tone now firmer. "We'll do what we can within the boundaries of the law, Mr. Anderson. But I need you to understand that resources are limited in a town like Dover. We have to prioritize cases based on the evidence we have." "Evidence?" Michael snapped, standing now, his chair screeching against the floor. "You want evidence? Fine. When I find my daughter, I'll bring you all the evidence you need." He stormed toward the door without waiting for Crane's response. Sarah lingered, looking back at the detective with tear-filled eyes. "Promise me you'll call the second there's any news, even if it's the smallest thing." Crane nodded once, his gaze softening. "I promise, Mrs. Anderson." Outside the station, the warm morning sun felt mocking against Sarah's skin. She caught up to Michael in the parking lot, his fists clenched at his sides as he paced near their car. "I'm not going to sit around and wait," Michael said before she could speak. His voice was low but brimming with determination. "We'll find her," Sarah replied, though her words sounded more like she was trying to convince herself. Back in the house, the tension swelled as they prepared for yet another round of calls and retraced steps. Michael sat at the dining table with a map of Dover spread out, marking every spot Lily might have gone. Sarah had a legal pad filled with contact numbers, Alina's mom, school friends, shop owners, anyone who might have seen Lily. They hit walls at every turn. Alina's mother had no answers. Alina herself wasn't responding to texts, claiming she'd been too exhausted to notice where Lily had gone after their usual hangout. Friends had last seen Lily at school the previous day, smiling and laughing as usual. Local shopkeepers offered sympathetic shrugs but no information. Even the small leads they managed to uncover felt hopelessly vague, like the scattered pieces of a puzzle with no edges to guide them. By the time evening fell again, Sarah sat hunched over the table, her head resting on her folded arms. Why does it feel like no one's listening? Michael stood at the window, staring into the quiet street beyond. Because they aren't. To them, she's just another runaway girl, another statistic. She's not a statistic, Sarah whispered sharply. She's our Lily. Michael turned to her, his jaw tight. Then we'll be the ones to prove it. By the time the mandatory 24-hour period had passed, the Andersons had already distributed dozens of missing persons flyers around town and entered Lily's details into every relevant online forum and social media group. They even contacted local news stations, though most reporters seemed hesitant to cover a story without something more dramatic to latch onto. Finally, Detective Crane called. "We're officially opening a missing persons case for Lily Anderson," he said. Michael felt a brief wave of relief before Crane added, "But I want to be honest with you, without new evidence or credible sightings, this might still take time. These things don't always move as fast as we'd like." "Time," Michael repeated, shaking his head even though Crane couldn't see him. "That's all my daughter doesn't have." Despite the bureaucratic red tape and initial lack of support, the Andersons refused to slow down. Beneath their fear and frustration was a relentless hope that they could bring Lily home, against all odds. A clue emerges. 2 grueling days had passed since Lily's disappearance, and the Anderson home no longer felt like a home. The once cozy craftsman-style house seemed cloaked in silence, despite the constant chatter of neighbors and volunteers coming in and out. The open floor plan echoed with the uneasy shuffling of papers, hushed phone calls, and Sarah's quiet tears. Every breath felt labored, every hour an eternity. Michael sat at the dining table with his laptop, scrolling through local online forums and Facebook groups, desperate for leads. Sarah floated in and out of the room, a ghost of her usual self, her eyes bloodshot from the sleepless nights and crying. The missing persons flyers, with Lily's smiling face printed in bold black and white, were stacked on the kitchen counter, waiting to be passed out to yet another group of searchers. As the clock ticked past 3 p.m., the ringing of the landline phone shattered the tense stillness of the house. Both Andersons jolted in place, hearts leaping. Sarah lunged for the phone, her hands trembling. "Hello?" she answered, her voice tight with both hope and dread. "Mrs. Anderson? This is Detective Crane," came the familiar voice from the other end, steady but not without urgency. Sarah covered the receiver with her free hand and looked at Michael, mouthing words he didn't need to interpret. He got up from the table and stepped closer, staring at Sarah as though willing the call to contain the miracle they had been praying for. "We've got a lead," Crane said plainly. Those 4 words hit Sarah like an electric current. "What? What do you mean? Did you find her?" Sarah stammered, clutching the phone tighter as though holding it closer might make the answers come faster. "Not exactly," Crane admitted, "but we spoke to Alina this morning. Under further questioning, she provided us with some new details. She mentioned Lily wanted to visit Greenwood Park at some point during the day she disappeared." Behind Sarah, Michael furrowed his brow. "Greenwood Park," he repeated aloud, his voice laced with skepticism. Sarah placed her hand over the phone and whispered, "Alina said she was in Greenwood Park." Crane continued, his tone firm but measured. "Alina only remembered this after extended conversation. She claimed they both thought it would be fun for Lily to sketch the old nature trail near the creek." Sarah's heart sank. She'd learned in her years in Dover that Greenwood Park had a reputation, one of both beauty and foreboding. Nestled on the town's outskirts, it wasn't exactly the go-to hangout for teenage girls. Sure, it had sprawling trails, quiet ponds, and the occasional family picnic, but its dense woods and overgrown paths created a sense of isolation. It wasn't uncommon to hear whispers among parents that kids who went there were up to no good, drinking, smoking, or worse. "That doesn't make sense," Sarah said softly, half to herself. "Lily doesn't even like hiking. Why would she want to go to Greenwood?" "I can't answer that just yet," Crane replied, his voice sympathetic but firm. "But I think it's worth a look. We're mobilizing officers to search the park's perimeter and trails as we speak." Michael reached out to take the phone from Sarah. "Detective, let's cut to the chase. Did Alina say why it's taken her 2 days to tell us about this? If she knew something, why wasn't she honest from the start?" Crane hesitated, the silence on the line cutting through the tension like a knife. "She said she didn't recall it clearly before," he explained. "Claims she was overwhelmed and couldn't piece the day together. Happens more often than you'd think in young witnesses." Michael frowned, unconvinced. "Overwhelmed? Is that what we're calling it now?" Sarah placed a calming hand on his arm, her expression taut with worry. "She's young, Mike," she whispered, though the words sounded more like she was trying to convince herself than him. Mr. Anderson, Crane interjected, bringing the focus back to the lead. Right now this is the only solid information we've managed to pull together, so I'd suggest we not waste time overthinking her motivation. Greenwood Park could be where Lily is, or where she was last seen. Michael leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table tightly, but his voice softened slightly. All right. What do you need from us? For now, stay put, Crane instructed. Leave the park sweep and immediate investigation to my team. If we need anything, from photos of Lily to more context about her interests, we'll be in touch. I'll call you the moment there's any development. The hours crawled by after that call, dragging with the weight of waiting and the gnawing sense of helplessness. If Greenwood Park held some sort of answer, why hadn't Lily called home? How had they overlooked it in their own frantic search? By 6 p.m., Michael couldn't hold back anymore. He paced the living room like a caged animal, muttering to himself. I can't just sit here, Sarah, he finally said, jerking his head toward the door. We've driven past that park a dozen times. I'm going. Sarah, sitting stiffly on the couch with Lily's sketchbook clutched to her chest, shook her head. Detective Crane said to wait. What are we waiting for? Another call? More bad news? Michael snapped, then softened at the sight of tears streaming down his wife's cheeks. I'm sorry, he added quietly. I need to do something. Anything. Sarah nodded. If you're going, I'm coming with you. By the time they arrived at Greenwood Park, the sunlight was fading and cast the park in long shadows. The once inviting trails now looked ominous, the trees creating a thick canopy overhead. A few patrol cars sat near the entrance, blue lights flashing faintly, signaling that the official search was underway. Michael and Sarah stayed just at the edge of the parking lot, peering toward the woods as officers combed through the area with flashlights and search dogs. It was a haunting scene, one that felt both hopeful and terrifying all at once. Sarah gripped Michael's arm, her nails digging into his sleeve as two officers disappeared down a trail marked with an old wooden sign reading Creek Path. No swimming. They stood there for what felt like hours, waiting with bated breath as searchers scoured the trails and called out to one another. Finally, one of the officers returned to the lot where the Andersons waited. His face bore the weight of someone holding back bad news, or maybe no news at all. For now, the officer started gently, we haven't found anything definitive, but we'll keep searching through the night. Definitive? Michael repeated, incredulous. What does that even mean? No sign of Lily, the officer admitted. No tracks, no belongings. We'll widen the perimeter tomorrow. As the officer walked back toward another group of deputies, Sarah's knees buckled slightly and Michael caught her before she collapsed entirely. Mike! Her voice broke as she clung to him, her words barely above a whisper. What if we're running out of time? He held her tighter, staring out toward the darkening woods, and made himself a promise. They wouldn't stop. Not until they brought Lily home. The horrifying discovery. The week following Lily's disappearance plunged Dover into a twilight of unease and dread. Doors remained unlocked less frequently, porch lights stayed on longer, and conversations in the town's cafes and convenience stores circled endlessly around theories and fears. Flyers with Lily's innocent smile peeked out from every corner, taped to telephone poles, scattered on cafe counters, tucked in the hands of strangers passing by. Everyone was searching, hoping, praying, but nothing prepared the Andersons or the town for what came next. It was a warm Thursday evening when the news broke. The last rays of sunlight painted the hills outside Dover in streaks of amber and gold, an almost cruelly beautiful backdrop to the storm brewing in the Andersons' lives. Sarah, eyes rimmed with exhaustion, was standing in the kitchen rinsing a coffee mug when the sharp, sudden knock at the door startled her. Michael was already moving towards it, his face stern, cautious. Detective Crane stood on the porch, his expression grave. His usual calm demeanor seemed heavier now, his lips drawn into a tight line. Behind him, there were two other officers, their uniforms dark against the soft glow of the setting sun. "Detective," Michael said sharply, stepping outside and closing the door partially behind him. "What's going on? Did you find something?" His voice fought to remain steady. He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the look on Crane's face had sent his heart racing. Crane rubbed the back of his neck, glancing briefly at the ground before meeting Michael's eyes. "Mr. Anderson, may we step inside? This isn't something we should discuss out here." Michael froze, his hand gripping the doorframe. That single sentence unraveled all the small threads of hope he'd been holding on to. Slowly he nodded and opened the door wider, calling for Sarah in a voice that sounded foreign even to himself. "Sarah," he said, his throat dry, "come here." Sarah appeared in the living room, clutching a dish towel, her brow furrowed. The moment she saw Crane's face, her knees seemed to falter. "Oh my God," she whispered, the dish towel falling to the floor. "Oh my God, no! Tell me you found her. Tell me she's okay." Crane stepped forward, his hat in his hand. "Mrs. Anderson, Mr. Anderson, we found a body near Greenwood Park." His voice was low, even, controlled, almost rehearsed in the way officers practiced delivering these gut punches of news. "It matches Lily's description." The air was sucked out of the room. Sarah stumbled back into the couch, her hands covering her mouth as if to keep a scream from escaping. Michael's shoulders sagged as though someone had physically struck him. "No!" Sarah cried into her hands, shaking her head violently. "It can't be her! This can't be happening! Tell me it's not her! You don't know that for sure!" Crane hesitated, his features softening. "We've sent for a full confirmation, including DNA analysis. We don't want to leave any doubt. But, from her clothing, height, and hair color—" He trailed off, as if saying the rest would make it crueler. Michael's jaw tightened, his fists clenched. "Where—" he began, his voice low and trembling. "Where exactly did you find her?" Crane cleared his throat and looked down. "By the creek trail, about half a mile past the no swimming sign. A hiker and his dog spotted something unusual in the underbrush and called it in." Sarah's sobs echoed through the room as she buried her face in the couch cushion. "My baby, my sweet girl." Michael's chest heaved with shallow breaths. In the back of his mind, he was screaming for this to be a mistake, wishing Lily would barge through the door and prove them all wrong. But Crane's grim expression left little room for hope. Later that evening, Crane returned with more details. Despite every instinct within him telling him to shield the family from the darker truths, the Andersons demanded answers, even if they weren't ready for them. "Her condition indicates foul play," Crane said cautiously after taking a seat at their dining table. He remained composed, but there was a shadow in his eyes that suggested he'd been wrestling with this discovery since the moment it came to light. "We believe she was restrained, tied, before—" he paused, gathering himself before pressing on. "Before she was killed." "Restrained?" Michael repeated, his voice thunderous. He stood abruptly, pacing the floor like a caged animal. "You're saying someone did this to her? Someone murdered my daughter?" Crane nodded grimly. "Yes. And whoever's responsible, Mr. Anderson, they knew what they were doing. This was deliberate." Sarah looked up from where she sat, her hands gripping a tissue so tightly it had shredded into soft pieces. Was she scared?" Her voice broke with the question. Crane hesitated just long enough to make Michael slam his hand against the table. "Answer her!" he shouted, his voice cracking mid-yell. "I can't say for sure," Crane replied carefully. "But our investigation, our initial examination, indicates it was quick. We believe she didn't suffer long." The Andersons crumbled further into grief, but beneath their devastation, anger and despair began simmering. It was no longer just helplessness, it was a thirst for justice. As news of the discovery rippled across Dover, the reaction was immediate. The small, tight-knit community fell under the heavy cloak of shock and mourning. Lily's face no longer represented hope and a search, it became a symbol of senseless tragedy. Everywhere townsfolk spoke with hushed tones, their collective grief turning to murmurs of fear. "Who would do this? Who could hurt her? She was just a kid," people whispered in grocery store aisles and over cups of coffee at the diner. Rumors spread like wildfire, and every stranger passing through Dover suddenly became suspect. At home, the Andersons sat together in their living room, staring blankly at the growing pile of condolence flowers and cards left by neighbors. But pity wasn't what they wanted. Answers were all that mattered now. "We're going to catch them," Michael said firmly, breaking the strained silence. "Whoever did this, they won't get away with it." Sarah nodded weakly but looked at him with tear-filled eyes. "They took her from us, Mike. They stole our Lily." Her voice broke again into sobs. Michael's grip on her arm tightened as he swore under his breath. "And we're going to make them pay." Detective Crane left the home that night more determined than ever. The pressure was mounting, not just from the Andersons but from every corner of Dover. As unsettling as it was, the horrifying discovery lit a fire under the investigation. Now, they weren't searching for a missing person. They were on the hunt for a killer. The first suspect. The whisper of a name drifted through the town of Dover like wildfire. From diner counters to gas station parking lots, it traveled with hushed urgency. Alina Brooks. While most of the town mourned quietly and offered their condolences to the Anderson family, others couldn't ignore the glaring truth that Alina, Lily's closest friend, had been with her the day she disappeared. People were quick to connect the dots. even if the picture wasn't clear. Alina was spirited, rebellious, and sometimes even reckless. In a small town like Dover, that was enough to raise eyebrows. The Andersons were still reeling from the news of Lily's death when Detective Crane knocked on their door the morning after the grim discovery. Sarah was huddled on the couch, a blanket wrapped tightly around her, while Michael sat at the dining table, staring blankly at Lily's sketchbook. Michael opened the door, his expression shifting quickly from exhaustion to guarded anger. "What now, Detective?" Michael asked, his voice hoarse from sleepless nights. Crane stood cautiously, weathered notepad in hand. "I need to talk to you both. There's a development in the investigation." "Is it about Lily's killer?" Sarah blurted out from the couch, her voice shaky but carrying a desperate edge. She quickly stood, the blanket slipping off her shoulders. "Possibly," Crane said, stepping inside and shutting the door behind him. He lowered his voice, his tone as serious as the lines on his face. "We've spoken to Alina Brooks. Some of her statements are raising questions." The room turned quiet, weighty with the implications of his words. Michael's fists tightened against the doorframe. "Alina? You think Alina had something to do with with what happened to her?" His words felt heavy, raw. "I never said that," Crane replied calmly, lifting a hand to temper Michael's rising anger. "But she's being considered as someone who might know more than she's let on." Sarah sank slowly back onto the couch, her knees wobbling. "Alina, no, she's just a kid. She loved Lily, she was her best friend." Crane sighed, flipping open his notepad. "I understand this isn't easy to hear. I'm not accusing her of anything, yet. But there are inconsistencies in what she's told us. Alina originally claimed she and Lily parted ways at Willow Creek Park the day Lily disappeared. Now she's saying they went to Greenwood Park together." Michael stepped forward. "She changed her story after 2 days? 2 days Lily was out there, alone, suffering God knows what, and Alina just forgot where they went?" His voice was loud enough that Sarah winced. Crane held up a hand. "These situations aren't always clear for young people. Fear, guilt, even trauma can confuse their memories. But here's what we've confirmed. Lily wasn't at Willow Creek Park that day. We've got no eyewitnesses, no footage, nothing. Everything points to Greenwood Park." Sarah shook her head, tears pooling in her eyes. "And Alina didn't think that was important to say earlier? Why? Why would she hide anything?" "That's what we're trying to figure out," Crane admitted. He flipped to another page in his notebook. "Here's another detail. A nearby resident reported seeing 2 girls at the Greenwood Park entrance that afternoon. They recognized Alina but didn't see the other girl's face clearly. It matches the time frame." Michael pulled a chair from the dining table, the legs scraping loudly against the floor, and sat down heavily. "So she was there with Lily. What does that mean? You think Alina was involved in hurting her?" Crane sighed again, this time heavier. "It's too early to jump to conclusions, but Alina's the last known person to see Lily alive, and the fact that she changed her story, it doesn't look good." Sarah's voice cracked as she spoke, clutching onto the couch cushion like it might hold her together. "You're investigating her, aren't you?" "Yes," Crane said bluntly. "We are. As of this morning, Alina is officially a person of interest." Later that afternoon, the Andersons couldn't stay seated anymore. Michael took a long drive around Dover, stopping at Greenwood Park, where police tape still fluttered in the breeze like warning flags. Sarah found herself pacing the kitchen, her hands trembling as she poured coffee she wouldn't drink. The phone buzzed on the countertop. It was a text from an unfamiliar number. "Mrs. Anderson, it's Alina. Can I please come talk to you? I need to explain." "What does she mean, explain?" Sarah asked to the empty kitchen, her heart pounding. She quickly showed the message to Michael when he walked in, his face dark with exhaustion and worry. "Tell her to come over," Michael said, his tone clipped. An hour later, Alina sat in the Andersons' living room, her legs drawn up tight against her body. She looked nothing like the confident, defiant girl Sarah and Michael had known. Her eyes were swollen and red, and her hands wouldn't stop shaking as she twisted the frayed bracelet Lily had made her. "I didn't hurt Lily," Alina said, her voice cracking under the weight of her words. "You have to believe me. I would never—" "Then why didn't you tell the truth?" Michael interrupted, his tone sharp as a blade. "Why did it take you days to tell anyone you both went to Greenwood?" Alina flinched, like she'd been struck. I didn't think it mattered. We didn't stay long. I thought, if I just said Willow Creek it'd be simpler, people wouldn't ask questions." Sarah frowned, leaning forward. "Why wouldn't you want people asking questions? Alina, what aren't you telling us?" Tears spilled down Alina's cheeks as she held her face in her hands. Because someone was there, someone saw us, and they told me." She stopped herself like the words had caught in her throat. "Told you what?" Michael demanded, his voice rising. Alina looked up at him, fear written across her face. They told me to keep quiet, that if I said anything they'd come after me too. Sarah gasped, clutching her chest, while Michael stood to his feet, his hands trembling at his sides. Who told you that? Michael barked, stepping closer. Alina shook her head violently. I don't know his name. He was older, maybe 20s or 30s, I don't know. He was just there near the trailhead. He said if I told anyone about him, he'd know. She let out a shaky breath. Please, you have to believe me, I didn't know what to do. Michael stared down at her, his anger momentarily overshadowed by confusion and unease. Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. Is this why Lily's gone? Because you lied? Because you were too scared? I didn't mean for anything to happen, Alina sobbed. I swear on my life. I thought if I just stayed quiet, it'd all go away. Michael and Sarah exchanged a look, their grief now laced with a growing storm of anger and dread. If Alina was telling the truth, then what happened to Lily wasn't an accident, it was premeditated. That night, as Alina left the house, her tear-streaked face was the only thing Sarah could picture when she closed her eyes. Michael sat silently at the kitchen table, his knuckles white as he clenched his fists. She knows something, Michael muttered finally, and I'll be damned if I let that girl walk away from this without giving us the truth. Sarah nodded weakly, her voice barely a whisper. I just want to know who could take our Lily away. For the Andersons, the revelation of Alina's withheld truth wasn't closure, it was a doorway to a much darker truth waiting to be uncovered. A terrifying truth unveiled. The wooden floorboards of the Anderson home seemed to creak a little louder, the clock above the dining table ticking with an agonizing rhythm that matched Michael's restless pacing. In the weeks since Lily's body had been found, their grief had turned into a fiery determination. Questions swirled endlessly in their minds, tangled with fear and anger. Why had this happened to Lily? Who had done this, and most importantly, why? Detective Crane's call came late one evening, the kind of call that comes with a hesitation in the voice, as if delivering the words themselves was a burden. Sarah answered first, her voice tight with emotion as she gripped the receiver. Michael stood by her side, silently praying the next words wouldn't slice open another wound they couldn't bear. Mrs. Anderson, Crane began, his tone as heavy as the air on the other side of the line. We've uncovered some disturbing information. You may want to sit down for this. Sarah, trembling, sank slowly onto the couch, the phone pressed tightly to her ear. What is it? Did you find him? The person who... She couldn't finish the thought, the words too painful to speak aloud. Crane exhaled audibly over the line. We're zeroing in on someone connected to Alina Brooks, a man she's been in contact with, someone who appears to have orchestrated everything from the shadows. We believe he manipulated her. Manipulated? Michael barked, anger flaring in his voice. He took the phone from Sarah, his jaw clenched. What the hell does that mean? Are you saying Alina was a pawn in all of this? That she didn't act alone? Exactly that, Crane admitted, his voice careful but firm. The person we're investigating is an older man, someone Alina knew as Hunter. That's a nickname, likely a pseudonym he used to hide his real identity. We've traced their connection to online messages, text exchanges, and even encrypted communication apps. Alina wasn't just withholding truths out of fear. This man terrorized her into compliance. Michael froze, his knuckles white against the phone. And yet she still lied to us. She lied while my daughter... His voice cracked, and he fell into the chair nearest to him. Sarah leaned forward, holding her husband's arm, as if to steady both him and herself. This man, this Hunter, who is he? Do you know where he is? Crane hesitated, and the slight silence only made Sarah's grip tighten. We're still working to uncover his true identity. Whoever this man is, he's a predator, a master manipulator. He builds trust, gives his victims false promises, and ultimately uses them to carry out his twisted motives. Over the next few days, shocking details emerged piece by piece, pulling the Andersons, the town of Dover, and even the police deeper into the nightmare. Crane sat across from the Andersons during yet another somber meeting at the police station. This time his notepad was full. Names, phone numbers, fragmented clues, and dates, all scribbled tirelessly in black ink. He leaned forward, his fingers laced together. The man calling himself Hunter befriended Alina through an online chat group, he began. From what we've gathered in our digital forensics, he pretended to be something she desperately needed at the time, an ally. Michael narrowed his eyes, his teeth grinding audibly. An ally? What does a teenage girl need with a sick bastard hiding behind a fake name? Control, Crane answered bluntly, glancing at Sarah for a moment before returning to Michael. Promises of excitement, validation. Whatever it took, Hunter made her trust him. Then he manipulated that trust. Sarah's voice shook as she asked the next question, even though she already dreaded the answer. Did he threaten her? Yes, Crane confirmed, pulling out an enlarged printout of a chat log. He slid it across the table so that both parents could see. The messages were clipped, clinical, yet chilling. Hunter, you want to make a quick few thousand? Easy job. Nothing dangerous, just make sure the girl shows up. Alina, are you sure? I don't know. She's my friend. Hunter, do what I say, or I'll make sure you pay. Trust me, I always keep my promises. Sarah covered her mouth, tears brimming as the realization sank in. She brought Lily to Greenwood Park because of this man, she whispered. Crane nodded grimly. That's what confirms his involvement. The original plan wasn't violent, not at first. Hunter got Alina and Lily to Greenwood by convincing Alina it was harmless. But the situation escalated that day, and when Lily became inconvenient, Hunter changed the plan. I don't believe this. Michael's voice rose, his chair scraping against the floor as he stood abruptly. You're telling me some coward hiding behind a screen is responsible for my daughter's death? And he made her friend help? His voice cracked as he emphasized the last word, the betrayal cutting just as deep as the loss. Crane sighed. I've seen cases like this too many times, Mr. Anderson. People like Hunter prey on the vulnerable. They don't get their hands dirty. They use others to carry out the crime, people who are desperate or scared, so they can stay in the shadows. Sarah shook her head, her tears falling freely now. What kind of man does this? What kind of person tears apart so many lives and doesn't feel a thing? The slow unraveling of Hunter's identity sent shockwaves through Dover. News spread that the man police were after, the man who had pushed Alina to act against Lily, was named Mark Sullivan. A 35-year-old man from out of state with a history of manipulating younger victims through online platforms. As the investigation escalated, federal agencies joined the hunt to track him down. Mark, as it turned out, wasn't just a small-town predator. He had years of evading law enforcement under his belt and had been implicated in similar crimes in neighboring states, though none had escalated to murder until now. One evening, weeks after the grim revelations began, Michael sat at the dining table in a rare moment of quiet. He stared down at Lily's unfinished sketchbook. On the last page there was a faint, half-finished drawing of Greenwood Park's hills, her pencil strokes capturing its quiet beauty. I should have known, Michael muttered, his voice low and broken. I should have seen this coming. Sarah sat across from him, her hands folded tightly together. You couldn't have known, Mike. None of us could have. He used my daughter, Michael said, his voice rising with anger. That bastard used her innocence, her trust. And he used Alina too, manipulated her fears. What kind of monster does this? One who we're going to stop, Sarah said firmly, though her heart ached with equal parts sorrow and rage, for Lily, for every girl he's hurt. That night the Andersons made a silent vow. Come what may, they would make sure Hunter and everyone like him was held accountable. Lily's story would not die with her. The Puppet Master. The name Mark Sullivan, or as he called himself, Hunter, hung in the Andersons' living room like heavy smoke, suffocating every breath. Since learning his real identity, Michael and Sarah had been replaying every new revelation in their minds, trying to make sense of the senseless. Who was this man? Why had he chosen Lily, an innocent, trusting girl? And more disturbingly, why did he seem to leave no trail? Detective Crane had visited again, armed with a folder brimming with the details the couple dreaded hearing, but needed to know. Mark Sullivan isn't your everyday criminal, Crane said as he adjusted his glasses and laid the folder on the coffee table. The Andersons, sitting across from him, were tense, leaning forward in their seats. Sarah gripped a tissue so tightly that it was already reduced to shreds. Michael's foot tapped the carpeted floor in a rhythm of frustration and restrained rage. He's smart, Crane continued. Cunning. He's manipulated multiple young people before, primarily through online platforms and chat rooms. This is not his first time exploiting someone to carry out his sick agenda. Unfortunately, we've seen it escalating with every case, and this... Crane hesitated. This is the worst we've ever seen. Michael stiffened. Escalating? Are you telling me this man has done this before? With someone else's daughter? His voice cracked slightly as the anger seeped through his otherwise steady tone. Crane nodded solemnly. Yes, we've been working with law enforcement in neighboring states. There are at least 3 other cases linked to Mark Sullivan. A pattern, if you will. Sarah leaned forward, her voice trembling and tearful. A pattern? What do you mean a pattern? How many lives has he destroyed? Crane flipped open the folder, his fingers skimming across the paper as his words landed like hammer blows. 3 girls, he said slowly, all between the ages of 15 and 18. Each case involved coercion. Mark would isolate vulnerable teens, promising them something they wanted: money, friendship, or a sense of belonging. Once he had their trust, he would take it further. He used threats, assured them he had eyes everywhere if they didn't do exactly as he said. Sarah clutched her chest and gasped softly. Three girls, she echoed, the weight of the revelation sinking into her chest like iron. Her voice dropped to a whisper. He's a monster. And those 3 girls are still alive? Michael's question was more of a demand. The fire in his voice burned hotter with every answer. They are, Crane confirmed, but none of them walked away without scars. In one case, Mark lured a girl into sabotaging her own friend's safety. In another, he threatened to release personal photos or messages unless the girl complied. He doesn't just manipulate his victims, Mr. Anderson, he terrorizes them. Michael shot up from his chair, his hands thrown into the air. And he's just been walking free? You're telling me this man, this predator, has been destroying lives for years, and no one cared enough to deal with him? Crane's jaw tightened. He leaned forward, his tone growing more resolute. Believe me, we're not letting him slip through this time. The fact that we've identified him is a massive step forward. This time we have more evidence. Digital communication, links to Alina's testimony, and now, Lily. Sarah spoke next, her voice trembling but firm. You said he builds trust, that he manipulates. How did he even find Alina? How does he know who to pick? Crane paused for a moment before responding, as though searching for a way to temper the brutal truth. People like Mark Sullivan prey on the vulnerable. They spend hours, sometimes days or weeks, watching, observing, and listening online. Alina was active in a couple chat groups for teens. She shared posts about feeling misunderstood, about wanting to get out of Dover, wanting to escape the predictable limitations of her life. Michael grit his teeth audibly and slammed his fist against the wall beside him. This isn't Alina's fault, he said, his voice laced with fury and pain. But someone should have been paying attention. Someone should have stopped him before. He couldn't finish the thought, his fists curled tightly at his sides. Lily never stood a chance, Sarah sobbed, her fingers pressing hard against her temples. She would have trusted Alina with her whole heart. That man, he used a child to hurt another child. Crane nodded grimly. That's exactly how he works. He manipulates one victim, coercing them into acting as his proxy. That keeps him at arm's length. No physical evidence on his part, no direct confrontation. It's always the victim-turned-accomplice left holding the bag. Sarah's tears flowed freely. So that's why Alina brought Lily to Greenwood Park. She thought she was just keeping Mark happy? She was terrified, Crane clarified. Our analysis suggests that Alina believed Lily wouldn't be harmed. Mark framed the encounter as something simple, telling Alina her role was just to get Lily there, nothing more. But once they were at the park, his plans changed. The night grew darker as Crane continued, each new detail sharpening the portrait of Mark Sullivan into a figure of unparalleled evil. Sarah poured Michael a glass of water, though neither of them dared drink. Their focus stayed firmly on Crane's every word. We've tracked Mark to an apartment in upstate New York, Crane finally revealed. We're working with federal agents to prepare for his arrest, but as you can imagine, someone like him doesn't stay in one place for long. Then what are we waiting for? Michael shouted. Go get him! Drag him out of his sick little hole and lock him away where he belongs. We will, but we need to do it right. If we spook him, if he catches wind of our movements, he could disappear all over again. With his history, he knows how to cover his tracks. Michael sat back down, running his hands over his face like he was trying to wipe away the anger and desperation. So what? We just sit here waiting for this piece of garbage to get the upper hand? Crane softened his voice, trying to calm the room. No, Mr. Anderson. We're closer than we've ever been, but I understand how hard it is to wait. He glanced between the grieving parents, his hand still firmly gripping the folder. Justice takes time, but we'll get there. The days that followed marked a shift in Dover's dynamic. What had once been whispers about Lily's disappearance turned into conversations about Mark Sullivan. Parents were seen yanking their children closer in public, neighborhood groups met late into the evening, and a quiet darkness settled over the town as a collective realization set in. Evil had come to Dover, uninvited and hidden in plain sight. The Andersons clung to one another tightly. While their grief remained raw and consuming, it had slowly begun to transform into something else: resolve. Every email from Crane, every new lead fed their hope that one day they would see Mark Sullivan in handcuffs. For Lily, for Alina, for every child he had scarred in his trail of destruction. "I don't care how long it takes," Michael said one evening as he stared aimlessly out the living room window, his reflection ghosting back at him. "As long as we stop him." Sarah stood beside him, whispering softly but with firm conviction. "We will. He thinks he's invisible, untouchable, but he's wrong." As the night deepened, the Andersons sat together, united in silent determination. They couldn't bring Lily back, but they could honor her memory by making sure Mark Sullivan never hurt another soul again. A chilling conspiracy. The evening air in Dover weighed heavy with an unshakable tension. In the Anderson home, the living room sat dimly lit, the only source of brightness emanating from the documents Detective Crane laid out on the coffee table. Michael and Sarah sat across from him, their heads bowed as if bracing themselves for yet another blow. They had already learned that Mark Sullivan, a man cunning enough to evade law enforcement for years, had orchestrated Lily's death from the shadows. But tonight, Crane's grim demeanor told them there was more, and it was worse. "Mr. and Mrs. Anderson," Crane began, his voice measured but grave, "we've uncovered additional details about Mark Sullivan's network. What we're looking at isn't just one deranged man. It's turning out to be more than that, much more." Michael perched on the edge of the couch, his fists tightly clenched, the tendons of his hands visible under his skin. "What are you saying, Crane? Spit it out, we can handle it." Crane hesitated for only a moment before continuing. "Mark didn't act alone, not entirely. He didn't just manipulate Alina, he directed her to bring others into his plan." "What?" Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her wide eyes flicked between Crane and Michael. "Others? What do you mean, others?" Crane leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees as if the weight of his own words was too much to carry. "Mark had Alina recruit 2 more people, teenagers, boys to be specific. He used her trust and fear to manipulate her, and then he paid her to manipulate them." Michael shot to his feet, his voice thunderous and shaking the walls of the small living room. "What the hell are you talking about, Crane? Are you saying there were 3 of them? 3, all working together to kill my daughter?" Sarah broke into quiet sobs, her hands trembling uncontrollably. She barely heard Crane's next words. "I'm afraid so, Mr. Anderson. Alina pulled in 2 high school seniors, both boys, both deeply troubled. Mark preyed on their vulnerabilities, promising them a way out of their struggles, an easy score of quick money they likely couldn't resist. Alina offered them $500 each, money that Mark supplied. She told them it was just a scare tactic, nothing more." "A scare tactic?" Michael repeated, his voice dripping with bitter disbelief. "What kind of kids do that? What kind of—" He stopped, running his hands over his face as if trying to scrub away the horrid image forming in his mind. Crane continued, his tone growing darker. "Mark had it all planned. He knew these were kids who'd follow orders without question for something they saw as easy cash. The boys didn't meet him directly. Alina acted as the go-between, but Mark's instructions were crystal clear in the text messages we retrieved. He didn't care about the money, that was just bait. The real goal was to control them, to ensure they stayed silent and loyal." Sarah finally found her voice, though it was weak, trembling. But why? Why Lily? Why use children? Why kill her?" Her voice broke on those last words, and she collapsed back into Michael's arms. Crane spoke slowly, his voice softening. "Because Mark thrives on power. It's not just about money for him, it's about control, about owning every piece of the chessboard. He chose kids because they're easier to frighten, easier to dominate. And as for Lily—" Crane stopped, his hesitation unbearable. "What?" Michael barked, his arm tightening protectively around Sarah. "Say it! Why her?" "Mark chose Lily because of her innocence," Crane finally admitted. "Because he knew she wouldn't fight back. She trusted people, especially Alina. She was the perfect victim, not just to hurt her but to destroy anyone around her who loved her." Sarah's muffled sobs filled the room as Michael clenched his fists so tightly his knuckles turned white. "And the boys?" Michael demanded, his voice low and sharp. "What are their excuses?" Crane sighed deeply. "We brought them in for questioning today. One of them, Jake Turner, confessed immediately. He said he thought they were just going to scare Lily, maybe take her backpack or leave her tied up in the woods. The other boy, Eric Daniels, claimed he didn't even know Lily was involved until it was too late. He said Alina convinced them it was harmless." "Harmless?" Sarah whispered, her tear-streaked face lifting slightly. "They call murder harmless?" "They panicked," Crane explained. "Mark's instructions escalated once Lily arrived at the park. He gave Alina last-minute orders, likely over the phone. He told her that Lily was a loose end, that if she were left alive, she might say something. The boys, They didn't know what was coming until it was already happening. Michael took a step toward Crane, his chest heaving with restrained fury. "And Alina? What did she do? Did she just sit there while my daughter was… while they…" His voice faltered, the pain too raw to articulate. Crane's face hardened. "By the time Lily realized something was wrong, it was too late. Alina claimed she tried to stop them, but the boys were following Mark's instructions to the letter. Alina said the guilt crippled her afterward, but she was also too scared to come forward because Mark made it clear, 'Speak up, and you're next.'" The room spiraled into silence, heavy as the truth began to anchor itself into the Andersons' hearts. This wasn't just some random, senseless murder, this was calculated, planned, orchestrated, and Mark Sullivan had pulled every string, moving children like chess pieces in his cruel, twisted game. "So what happens now?" Michael asked after a long pause, his voice slow but boiling with barely contained fury. "What do we do with this?" Crane looked at the grieving parents with steady eyes. "The boys and Alina are in custody while we build the case. The confessions and the digital footprint Mark left behind put us closer to an airtight conviction against him. Federal agents are moving in on Mark's last known location. We'll get him." Michael stared at Crane, his jaw tight. "You'll get him, but it won't bring Lily back." "No," Crane admitted softly, his voice heavy, "but it will stop him from ever doing this again." Sarah wiped her tears with shaky fingers, her voice soft but filled with quiet steel. "We'll make sure he never hurts anyone else, for Lily, for all the kids he's destroyed." That night Michael sat alone at the dining table staring at Lily's final sketch lying open in her sketchbook. The faint pencil-stroked hills of Greenwood Park stared back at him. He felt his anger rising again, hotter this time. Alina, those boys, and most of all Mark Sullivan, they had stripped his daughter's future from her, smothered her light, and for what? Power, control, money? In the dark, Sarah came up beside him, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "We'll keep fighting, Mike," she whispered. Michael nodded, his voice rough with emotion. "They think he's the puppet master. They think he's smarter than the rest of us, but we both know one thing." Sarah met his gaze, her expression resolute. "No one's untouchable," he said softly, the fire in his voice unwavering. "Not even him." Justice delivered. The courtroom was packed. The town of Dover and beyond had been waiting for this moment for months, the culmination of a long, winding nightmare that had left too many scars to fully heal. The trial of Mark Sullivan, the man known as Hunter, drew national attention. Reporters sat clustered at the back of the courtroom gripping notepads and camera equipment, ready to record every damning detail. On the left, the Anderson family sat in the front row, flanked by rows of friends and neighbors offering quiet support. On the right, Sullivan sat shackled in a chair, his face seemingly devoid of emotion, as though this were just another day to him, a regular stop on his twisted journey. Michael Anderson had wanted to throw a punch the moment he walked through those courtroom doors, and saw the man who had shattered his family's world sitting smugly at the defense table. Only Sarah's calming hand on his arm had stopped him. Her touch reminded him why they were there, not for angry outbursts but for justice, justice for Lily. Detective Crane had warned them to prepare for anything, explaining that Sullivan would likely try to downplay his role, to paint himself as a scapegoat or deny everything. But Michael didn't need warnings. All he needed was the evidence. Those damning text messages, Alina's tearful confessions, the boys' testimonies, and Lily's disappearance. It was an airtight case, but it didn't make hearing the details again any easier. The trial began with cold declarations, a contrast to the swirl of emotion that hung heavy in the courtroom. The prosecutor, a stern woman named Valerie Hayes, wasted no time walking the jury, and everyone else, through the nightmarish timeline. "Mark Sullivan," Hayes began, her voice steady yet sharp enough to cut through the tension, "is not just a predator. He is a master manipulator, someone who thrives on exploiting the vulnerable and orchestrating chaos from the shadows. What you will see during this trial is that Sullivan didn't just plan a crime. He planned a conspiracy of fear and destruction meant to absolve himself of responsibility and place the blame squarely on those he targeted to do his bidding. Every word felt directed not just at the jury but at the Andersons, a promise that this fight was for them." Sarah gripped Michael's hand tightly, her knuckles white, as Hayes began weaving the story the courtroom already knew far too well. As the evidence unfolded, piece by piece, the courtroom became a gallery of shock and revulsion. Alina, now 19 and sitting in the witness stand, looked older, hollowed out by guilt and time. Her voice cracked as she recounted the way Mark had dangled easy money in front of her at a moment when she felt lost and desperate. "He told me it wasn't a big deal," she said, tears falling freely. that nothing bad would happen. All I had to do was make sure Lily got to the park, that's it. He told me I'd regret it forever if I didn't do what he said. And did he threaten you? Hayes pressed, her voice unwavering but lacking cruelty. Alina nodded and broke into a sob. Yes, every time I hesitated he'd text me something worse, saying he knew things about me, saying that he could hurt my mom if I didn't do as he said. He had eyes everywhere. Or at least that's what it felt like. Despite the anger Michael felt toward Alina, seeing her on the stand, crumbling under the weight of Sullivan's manipulation, left him with conflicted emotions. He wanted to hate her, to believe she was irredeemable, but it wasn't that simple. Sullivan had spun his strings too tightly for her to escape. That monster had trapped her too. The defense attorney attempted to poke holes in Alina's testimony, insinuating that she'd acted out of greed more than fear, but Hayes shut it down swiftly by drawing the jury's attention back to the digital evidence. The most chilling moment came when Eric Daniels, one of the teenage boys Sullivan had manipulated through Alina, took the stand. He couldn't even look at the Andersons, his head hung in shame and remorse. He made it all sound like a joke, Eric said. Alina told us that we just had to scare her, teach her a lesson or whatever, but then things got out of control. Mark called Alina, and I couldn't hear everything, but her face changed. She told us to tie Lily up and leave her there. I didn't think, His voice cracked and the words refused to come. Michael clenched his fists, biting back the urge to yell, "You didn't think..." But again Sarah's hand steadied him. Eric broke into sobs. And then, he paused, shaking his head. After it happened, Mark texted her again. He said we had to make sure she wouldn't tell anyone. "And you followed through," Hayes stated, her voice steely as she met the boy's tear-filled gaze. "You left Lily there, restrained and alone, under Sullivan's exact orders." When Eric nodded miserably, murmurs rippled through the crowd, and Michael had to look away to keep from exploding. The turning point came when Crane himself took the stand, walking the court through the final web of Sullivan's activities, not just in Dover, but across multiple states. Mark Sullivan operates through fear, Crane told the jury. He doesn't leave the evidence of his crimes on his own hands. Instead, he controls others, using their vulnerability as his weapon. This isn't the first time, but it's the last time. This time, he will face the consequences. Crucial text messages were displayed on an oversized screen. Sullivan's cold, calculated messages sparked outrage in the crowd. Each word oozed with callous intent. "Hunter, you don't have a choice. Handle it. Hunter, loose ends make messy lives. Do what I say, and this goes away." For Michael and Sarah, it felt like watching a horror movie in slow motion, knowing everything they were seeing had played a part in Lily's last moments. When the verdict finally came, it was as though the world itself paused to hear the words. "Mark Sullivan," the judge said, his tone heavy with authority, "you have been found guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and the exploitation of minors. Given the overwhelming evidence, this court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole." The room exhaled, a collective wave of relief mixed with exhaustion. Sarah broke into tears, leaning against Michael, who whispered, "It's done. It's over." But deep down, he knew it wasn't over. Lily was still gone. No verdict could undo what had been done, but at least the man who stole her life wouldn't hurt another soul. As Mark Sullivan was led out of the courtroom in chains, he locked eyes with Michael one last time. For the first time in months, Michael didn't flinch or look away. "You didn't win," Michael whispered under his breath. "You've lost everything." That night, when Michael and Sarah returned home, they sat in Lily's old room for hours, taking in the remnants of her life. They couldn't bring her back, but they felt something shift in their grief. Justice had been served, and they had fought for her until the end. "She would have been so proud of us," Sarah said softly, running her hand over Lily's final drawing of Greenwood Park. Michael nodded, placing an arm around his wife. "She's watching over us," he said, his voice steady now, "and she knows we never gave up." The costly lesson. The first snow of the year was falling quietly over the town of Dover, the kind of peaceful scene that had once perfectly matched its postcard-worthy charm. Now, though, the snow didn't seem to cleanse the town of its darkness. It coated the streets and rooftops like a fragile shield, but the scars of what had happened to Lily and to the Anderson family weren't so easily covered. Life had begun to take shape again, but it wasn't the same. It couldn't be. The trial was over, the verdict a victory, but to the Andersons it felt bittersweet. Justice had been delivered, yes, but justice didn't bring Lily back. They had exchanged their grief-laden days in court for quieter evenings at home, but that quiet was still haunted. Memories hung in the air like ghosts, and every creak of the old house reminded them of Lily's absence. One evening Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea. Michael stood by the window, staring into the snowy yard. The silence between them was comfortable, but heavy. "Do you think the town has learned anything?" Sarah finally asked, her voice soft but tinged with exhaustion. Michael turned, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" She set the mug down and shook her head slowly. "About what happened, about Lily, about all of it. Do you think people really understand what they need to do to protect their kids? Or are they just going to talk about it for a while and go back to pretending things like this can't happen here?" Michael didn't answer right away. Instead he rubbed his hands together, gazing out the frosted window. "I don't know. People like to think Dover is safe, that it's special because it's small and quiet, but things like this don't care about how small or quiet a place is. Evil finds cracks to slip through." Sarah nodded, her eyes dropping to the table. "The cracks were there, Mike, we just weren't looking closely enough." Michael turned back to her, his voice softening. "We couldn't have known what Mark Sullivan was or what he was doing. Nobody could have." "That's just it," Sarah said, her voice picking up intensity. "Nobody did. We've all gotten so comfortable, so used to saying, 'Not my kid,' or 'Not here,' that we missed what was right in front of us. We let Alina fall through the cracks. We let kids like her feel so desperate, so isolated, that they become pawns for people like him. And Lily was just trying to be a good friend." Michael moved closer to the table, pulling out a chair and sitting across from her. He reached for her hand, his own rough and calloused from years of work but now trembling slightly. "No one can predict monsters like him, Sarah, but you're right. We did miss the signs. The question now is, what do we do with that? How do we make sure no other family has to go through this?" She looked up at him, her face marked with both grief and determination. "We start talking, Mike. Really talking. Not just to each other, but to everyone. Parents, teachers, kids. People need to know what to watch for. They need to know that the internet isn't some harmless thing you hand over to a kid without supervision. They need to know that if a kid like Alina is crying out for help, we don't just brush it off because she's difficult or rebellious, or because we think it's a phase. We pay attention." Michael leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. "You're talking about change, Sarah, real change. That's not easy. People resist that. It's messy and it's uncomfortable." "Yeah, it is." Her tone sharpened slightly as she sat a little straighter. "But Lily deserved better, and so does every other kid in this town. It's not enough to hope the school counselor notices something, or to assume the church group is enough, or to look the other way because it's easier. We've got to do better, all of us. If we don't, it'll happen again. Somewhere, to someone else's family, to someone else's Lily, and I don't think I could live with that." Michael looked at her for a long moment, the fire in her voice igniting something in him. He nodded slowly. "What are you thinking?" Sarah got up from her seat, pacing the kitchen, her hands moving as she spoke. "I'm thinking we tell Lily's story. We go to the schools, hold forums, whatever it takes. We don't let people forget what happened. We show them how it happened, how someone like Mark Sullivan was able to reach into our lives and steal our daughter away. We teach them what to look for, what not to ignore." Michael was silent for a moment, watching her as she walked back and forth. Finally he said, "You're braver than I am." "No," she replied firmly, stopping to look at him. "I'm just a mom who doesn't want her daughter's life to mean nothing." The next day Sarah reached out to Detective Crane. She explained her idea, a series of community meetings where parents, kids, and educators could come together to discuss the dangers of online predators, mental health struggles in teenagers, and how to better support vulnerable kids like Alina. Crane, who had seen too many cases like this in his career, agreed immediately, offering to speak at the meetings himself. The first session was held in the Dover High School auditorium a month later. The seats were filled with parents, students, and local officials. Sarah stood at the podium, clutching Lily's sketchbook in her hands as she addressed the crowd. She told them about Lily, about her innocence, her love for art, her quiet sweetness. She talked about how Mark Sullivan had preyed on Alina's pain and used her as a pawn to hurt Lily, how he had orchestrated everything from behind the scenes, but she also talked about the signs they missed, the conversations they didn't have, the questions they didn't ask. "Evil doesn't announce itself," she said, her voice steady but trembling with emotion. "It sneaks in, it waits for you to stop paying attention, and if you think it can't happen to your kid, I'm here to tell you it can. We never thought it would happen to Lily, but it did, and now it's up to us to make sure it doesn't happen again." Months turned into years and the Andersons' small initiative grew into something bigger. They partnered with non-profit organizations, schools across the county, and even federal agencies to spread awareness. Sarah and Michael became advocates, not just for internet safety but for mental health awareness, for stronger resources for at-risk teens, and for building communities where no one fell through the cracks. Lily's name became a symbol of hope, a reminder of what was lost but also of what could be prevented. And though the pain of losing her never went away, it became something else, a driving force, a legacy built on love and purpose. One snowy afternoon years later, Michael stood in front of the community center they had renamed in her memory, the Lily Anderson Foundation for Safety and Support. He looked up at the sign, tears in his eyes, and whispered, "We're still fighting for you, Lily, always."